friendship and what we can learn from it. So I hope you're able to listen in.
Off this segment by thinking a little bit about what Lewis and Sayers would maybe say to our current context. And it might require a bit of speculation on your part, but your speculation would be more informed than mine. We were both storytellers and artists and very creative. And unfortunately, Christian art today, particularly in media and film, often has a connotation of just being poor quality. How would they speak into the idea of fictional storytelling today?
Well, Sayers had very strong opinions about this and sometimes bickered a little bit with Lewis about it. She was passionate about how the art had to come first. The story had to come first. For creative writers, or creative artists in any medium, really, this was just the way it had to be. Because if God called you to be an artist, your job was to make a work of art and to make it as well as you possibly could. And then whatever of your faith or your ideas or whatever else was in your mind and part of your personality, part of your makeup, would come into it as part of it. But she would say the work of art had to come first, or it would be a bad work of art and not glorifying to God at all, and end up turning more people away than it helped. So she was very, very insistent upon that. And if Lewis ever dared to differ with her a little bit on that, she would put him straight very quickly and make no bones about it. But he did feel pretty much the same way, although sometimes he felt a little shaky in that belief. She did all that she could to firm him up in it. He was a little bit inclined to whatever message somebody wanted him to put out there, he would be a little inclined to, go along with it and write it. And she would say, no, you have to write what God calls you to write and make a great work of art and let God worry about the rest. Mm-hmm. So, and I think there are some of his later essays. You can find some of them in a great book called On Stories and Other Essays on Literature, where he does seem to echo what some of the things that she said to him. For instance, when he talks about coming to write the Chronicles of Narnia, he said, it all started with images in my head, a lion, a lamppost, these pictures that I had to put into a story, and then all the Christianity and everything that was in me came with it. And so that's a very Sayers sort of thing to say. So I think he really was with her on that.
Yeah, we often hear that tension with different artists, where some will say, I make Christian music, it's what I'm all about. And others will say, I'm a Christian who makes music. And sometimes it comes out and it's really more subtle and just permeated underneath everything I do, but it may not be as explicit. Mm-hmm. I have that tension between, should artists create to communicate a particular message, or should they just create for creation's sake? And I think you're saying Sayers more falls on that side.
Right. And it is a great tension, and it's a difficult area to navigate sometimes, but Sayers, as I said, felt very strongly about it. And reading what she has to say on the subject can be pretty clarifying, because there are, as you've said, there are explicitly Christian works, and then there are works that just happen to have been created by Christian artists. And I think both are valid, but Sayers' idea that the first concern is to create a good work of art, whatever you're creating, whether it's explicit or implicit, I think that would help us a lot in some of the difficulties we run into in that department, if we could bear that in mind.
Mm. Tell us a little bit more about what maybe we can learn in friendships from their disagreement with one another. I think that's very important as well.
Well, they respected each other enormously, and I think that helped. I mean, of course, neither one was perfect, and they knew that, and each knew the other wasn't perfect. And there were times when they had disagreements, and you could see them. Sometimes they would write letters to other people saying, oh, so-and-so just doesn't get this or that. And yet at the same time, they did have great respect for each other's faith and abilities and intellect. And so they took each other seriously, even when they were arguing. There was no contempt there. There was no attempt to undercut each other. They both knew. They each knew that the other was doing good work and making good things, and doing important things. And so I think respecting each other like that helped them a lot and kept their arguments from turning, really serious or really deadly.
Yeah, it was good to see how they had enough respect for each other to really defend their position and to speak from a place of conviction, but care enough about the other person to disagree with them. I think that's something that is an important element of friendship as well, to love the other person enough to disagree with them. And that would perhaps come out at times over their view of masculinity and femininity. You note in the book quite regularly that Lewis wasn't raised around close relationships with many women. So this was kind of a different aspect for him, at least earlier on. Would you speak to that a bit?
Yes, it was very different. He had lost his mother at a young age. He went to primarily male schools and was in the military for a while. And so one way and another, he had not had a lot of relationships with women. I wrote a little bit in the book about how when they began this friendship, he sort of had to navigate. He was always very polite to her and to other women, but for a man who loved argument, and you often read this about Lewis, that with his male friends particularly, he loved to get into a good roaring argument. That was meat and drink to him. With a female friendship, he wasn't always sure just at first how to navigate that. He wanted to be courteous and respectful, and sometimes would pull his punches a little bit with her at the beginning. But as their friendship went on, and I think possibly particularly as he met with her in person occasionally, he came to find out that he did not have to do that, because Sayers liked an argument as much as he did, if not more. And she had a personality that he said was like a high wind, just enormously energetic and boisterous. And I think that sort of helped him put some things together, because that was the kind of personality that he liked in men, and now he found it in this woman. And it just really helped their friendship a lot, I think, because he was more like, oh, I don't have to pull my punches. We can have a real conversation. We can have arguments without it getting, beyond the pale. We can just have a real friendship. And eventually Lewis would go on to marry a woman who was like that, who had that boisterous sort of personality. So I think perhaps being friends with Dorothy helped prepare him a little bit for Joy.
It was interesting too, reading about Dorothy's impression of Joy, where she was friends with him first and then she sees Joy come into the picture. Would you describe that encounter a little bit?
Yes, I think we don't have an awful lot of records on this, but what we do have, it sounds like Dorothy and Joy hit it off right away because they had so many things in common. Joy actually liked detective fiction, which Lewis didn't really. So Joy and Dorothy could talk about that because Dorothy was such a great writer of detective fiction. And they just clicked. And so when a lot of Lewis's male friends were not really in favor of that marriage, Dorothy was supportive. And when Joy was sick, of course, Lewis married her when she was sick, and he told Dorothy about this in his letters, and she was supportive, and he wrote some of the most beautiful things he ever wrote were written to Dorothy about his marriage, because some of the letters by Lewis that are well known, when he says, "My heart is breaking and I was never so happy before," things like that. He wrote that to Dorothy because she was such an understanding and supportive friend, and somebody that he could confide in.
What do you think about the cultural context, being in England in the 30s, 40s, and 50s compared to being in America in 2020? Would their friendship looked different? Is this kind of friendship even possible today? Letter writing and technology itself is different.
Well, letter writing, very sadly is not what it once was. Most of us don't do very much of it, which is understandable, but very sad. I think, I mean, it's quite possible they would have written a lot more emails and texts to each other, but I mean, I would hope they would have written letters too. It's really hard to know, but in any hypothetical that one can come up with, to be without those letters would be a tragic thing, because they're so great and their friendship grew so much through them. And emails are great for some things and they're very convenient, but it's just not the same. And I don't know if their friendship would have looked the same if it had developed that way.
There is something when you do have such a common passion for something, even a very long distance friendship that you don't get to see in person very often, can really be sustained through continued dialogue and cherished. I've appreciated that in my own life.
Right. Yes.
And again, that was Gina Dalfanzo talking about her book on C.S. Lewis and Dorothy Sayers that I really encourage you to check out. And once again, we're just thinking about the importance of friendship, how it's a gift that God gives us to be in these close relationships with others, to be challenged by them and grow through them. And if you haven't had the chance to reach out to a friend today and encourage them, thank them for their role in your life, I know they'd be blessed by it, so I encourage you to check that out. Well, we're coming up to the end of our show here. I've got a little bit more of the interview to play with you, and then we'll be wrapping up at 12 o'clock. So thank you for tuning in, and I encourage you to keep listening. You're tuned into 100.1 Remnant Radio, the radio station of your life.
Like radiant diamonds bursting inside us. We can't